This is EF Outbound, a podcast that showcases transformative travel stories that defy our expectations, challenge our assumptions, and teach us something new about the world and ourselves. I'm Shelby Elatmani, and I'll be your host for this episode.
We had the open call. People came, and when I saw that couple, that family, and we weren't able to give them a loan, I remember crying myself to sleep that night because I was like, this is not fair. Like, how is this possible? Why is this, and why can I not do anything about this? I think that's when it struck me of like, this is tough. This is gonna be very tough. Growing up on the border between the U.S. and Mexico, my parents would take me in the mornings. I would go to private school in the U.S., and then I would go to public school in Mexico in the evenings. Public school in the evenings in Mexico meant it was for the kids that were either working or they had to look after their siblings in the morning because their parents were at work. They were makeshift desks, and kids sometimes had come, they didn't have their backpacks, they didn't have pencils. Why do these kids over here have this, but these kids don't? I would just say this isn't fair. That's always been my big driver, has always been like, what can I do to make a difference?
Nayeli's drive to make an impact continued on through college. For a while, she thought she wanted to be a politician or diplomat, but the more she studied, the more she realized that a lot of inequality can be traced back to one thing:
money. So understanding really how money plays a role and how, the economic of things have an impact on social development. I need to know this part because this will have an impact.
So she turned to economics, and she was particularly interested in studying how microfinance can impact gender equality.
I come from a single-parent household. My father passed away when I was very young, so it was, important for me to understand those dynamics. My thesis was on microfinance and the impact of microfinance in primarily women in rural areas of Mexico and how that was changing the dynamics of households. Research has shown within these communities that there's, the women are more likely to look after the family, the education, and the health and the well-being of the family.
Nayeli had a theory. She figured that if you could go into a community and give a woman a small loan of $100 or $200 to start their own businesses, these women would in turn be able to create a chain reaction of change. They could supply jobs, which would help other families provide education and supplies for their children, and those children with a better education could have more opportunity and a positive influence in their communities. Nayeli believed that in the long run, a $100 loan could actually spark systemic change from the bottom up and make a major impact. But again, it was just a theory.
There's only so much you can learn from a book or from research on its own.
She decided to test it out in the real world, and was accepted by an organization that sent her and a group of postgrads to the Maheba refugee settlement in Zambia. The Maheba refugee settlement was established in 1971 in order to take in an influx of refugees from conflicts in Angola. Since then, the settlement has taken in refugees mainly from Angola, Congo, and Rwanda. And even when these countries regained stability, many people didn't or couldn't leave.
People have been there through years and years. A lot of the refugees were actually born there. A lot of them have never seen life outside with the refugee camp.
The settlement is massive, about the size of a small country like Bahrain in the Middle East. It's split into multiple sections spread out over the area, and it can take people hours to go from one section to another. Because so many of the refugees' lives are in limbo for such long periods of time, it was important for Nayeli and her team to create a program within the camp that could last years.
The idea was that, you were able to bring an idea to life in this refugee settlement that would be sustainable, right? And that was the key point, that it would be sustainable.
The project was split into two main parts. First, she and her team would interview women in the camp interested in receiving a loan.
We raised money before leaving to have these loans. So we're talking about like $50 loans, $20 loans. But in order for them to receive the loan, they would have to go to a series of like workshops to get this quote-unquote business certification.
Nayeli came up with a curriculum that would give the women the skills they'd need to actually run the businesses.
We also had to be careful that the women that were coming for these loans weren't being asked by their male household partners to go get the loan and then give me the money. So that's why we had these workshops.
There were two types of loans the women could apply for: group loans or individual loans.
We were incentivizing the group loans just because we didn't want to burden one person. And with microfinance loans, obviously they're small loans, and you never want to give them a larger amount of the loans than what you know that they'll be able to pay back within a specific time. So you have to be very cautious with that. So, here I am, a student in Northeastern, and doing all my research and saying this is what we need to do. Where are you going to go? This is the curriculum. We're going to teach them about business practice and how to set up a business plan, and how to sell and what's profit and how to balance the sheet. And then at the end they will be professionals and they'll be able to get their loan. So this was my idea from my library at Northeastern. So I graduated college. As I usually do, I plan to do things and then don't realize where I am until I'm about to board the plane and say, great, I'm moving to Africa for 8 weeks. I had no idea really what it was going to be like. I had no idea. I had no idea that my life was going to completely change. There's the aspect of seeing poverty, but then there's the aspect of seeing a refugee settlement. I had an idea of what it was like, but you really don't know until you're there, and then you kind of see the whole economic system there, the farms, the markets, the underground economy that takes place. You forget you're in a settlement because it's just kind of, just like any small town, right? You have your church, your everything. As humans, we find a way to recreate our own settings as much as we can and to continue with our lives as normal as we can. And I think that's what they were trying to do. The first stage was interviewing, so we kind of we did like an open call and said, if you're interested, come and talk to us about these loans. And of course, when you put loan in like an advertisement, people go crazy. We had a lot more people than we imagined or anticipated were going to come. And I don't know why we didn't imagine or anticipate that when you say you're going to give out loans, everybody's going to come. So we had about 25 women show up in one day for individual loans and about 30 women for group loans.
But it turned out that most of the women who had showed up for group loans actually only wanted individual loans. They had their own business ideas and they wanted their own money.
In my mind, everybody was going to do group loans, so we had to kind of restructure the whole thing. We still did put a lot of people who were requesting individual loans into group loans. There were multiple people that wanted to put a hair salon. There were multiple people that were like, oh, we should do, I want to do a butcher shop. So we kind of ended up being like, okay, you all want the same thing. How about this? And it was really tough because we'd be like, well, no, because then my profit's going to be less. And a lot of times we had to be very sensitive of like, okay, which part of the camp do they come from? Because within the camp, there were different groups that were separated on purpose. I didn't even think that was something that was going to happen.
But that was just the beginning. As Nayeli began to learn more about these women and their families, she suddenly felt the gravity of where she was and the people she was trying to assist.
One of the saddest stories was when I met, it was the husband and the wife who was pregnant, and they have a 5-year-old daughter, and they all have AIDS. And we weren't able to give them a loan. They came too late, so we had already given out all the loans that we had. I remember crying myself to sleep that night because I was like, this is not fair. Like, how is this possible? Why is this, and why can I not do anything about this? My other partner, he was in charge of all the business and the numbers and like making sure that we had the biggest impact financially. And he was like, look, we can't do it. And I'd be like, but why? This is why we're here.
But that wasn't why they were there. They were running a business, not a charity. They had to really think about who they were giving loans to in order to do the most long-term good.
It was just really tough to know that you can't change the world, and life is not always fair. And I think that was probably a pivotal moment where I was like, why? And after that, I just kind of had to be like, okay, I gotta focus on what I'm here to do and figure out how I can make the most of it and have the most impact at the end of the time.
The women were selected and classes were about to begin. Then, Nayeli ran into yet another obstacle.
The women were actually a lot busier than the men in the camp. The women were in the markets, they were cooking for the family, they were making clothes for the family, looking after their babies. They didn't have that much time to be able to go to these workshops or have time to kind of put towards the business and idea. They really just wanted to have the money and go and get things done.
Of course, Nayeli had anticipated that the women would be busy. In fact, it was pretty important to her original theory.
It was much bigger of a problem than we thought. So it was just kind of, okay, this is the problem, this is a roadblock, how are we going to change it? What are we going to do to make it more impactful and work with what we have?
It would take the women about 2 hours to commute to and from class by bike, if they were lucky enough to even own one. So the team realized it would be better to bring the class to them instead. Nayeli biked her way to the other side of the camp, bright-eyed and optimistic. Despite the initial bumps in the road, she felt confident that her curriculum would help the women change their lives.
When I went to the first class, here I am super prepared, and they just stared at me, blank faces, and I'm like, what's happening? Like, what's going on? And then I realized that, they knew how to run a business. They've been living in this camp, some of them all of their lives, and they had a really well-established commerce there. I couldn't sit there and deliver this lesson plan that I had. All they cared for is to get the money. And here we were trying to be like, oh, you need to learn, you need to prove to us that you can do this, this, and that, which in retrospect is just really silly to think about that. And what they really needed more than anything was somebody to give them that encouragement, maybe, and empowerment. So once that hit me, I basically just started the class with like, let's just learn about each other. Once I got them to feel a little bit comfortable with each other and to just tell them like a little bit about me and kind of why I was there, I asked them, why are you here? They're like, yeah, we want the money, but also, what do you have to, I want to learn what you have to say about business, in your world. They were shy. They didn't think they could speak up. They didn't think that they could, speak what they wanted to speak about, or much less be seen as women that were running businesses or women that could make money, even though that's what they were already doing. They wanted to learn more. They wanted to be empowered. That was probably the first realization, saying, okay, I have to step out of my student self and, be a person and just understand from their perspective. And really, I'm not here to tell them what's good or not. And it's not really like, you should follow what I tell you to do because I know better, because that's 100% not at all what we wanted to do.
She continued to adapt her plans and listen to the women's stories and ambitions. But at the same time, Nayeli shifted her focus from the books to really being in the camp and surrounding herself in the difference.
I would wake up super early as soon as the sun rose, but it was just magnificent skies. I can't even describe, yellow, orange, beautiful skies. I had two of my friends who would pick me up at my camp where we were. One of them was a teacher at the school that we would give the workshops at. So he would go on his way to work. He would do a detour, pick me up. And the other one was translating for us. And so it was basically on our bike rides, our 2.5 hour bike rides for, going and coming back. We would talk about everything. And they would just ask me, tell me everything. Tell me about life. What is it like in the U.S.? I remember one of them asking me, tell me about your studies. And I would be like, I studied economics, and tell me more about economics. And then for me to also be like, tell me about your experience, tell me about your dreams and your goals, and what do you want to do, and how are you going to do those things. My favorite parts of the day were just having those cycling with them and just talking about anything and everything. There was a church in the camp, and they would always invite us to go to church. And we would go together as a group. A lot of them were not religious at all. We all loved to go because the faith that people have, the way that they would sing, and the way that they would just kind of gather, and it was and I remember thinking, being like, man, they have so much faith. They've never seen anything outside of this world, and yet their faith is so big that they know that they're going to leave one day. This is one thing that I've learned quite a lot. The people that have less are the people that are the most giving. My friend used to, invite me over to her house all the time to eat dinner. They didn't have a lot to eat, yet they would be like, Nayeli, come. And of course I didn't want to take, it was such a conflicted situation. I was like, I don't want to take your food, but I also don't want to be rude and say no, because it's not just about the food. It's about you want to share. After our long day of, cycling and dealing with pretty tough stuff, just all of us getting around the campfire, the smell of burning wood in general always takes me back to Maheba, always. It just, it didn't matter that I, was eating rice and beans every single day, because I was so blessed that I was eating rice and beans. You just appreciate it every single bit. And I was with, people that were happy to be there. The smell of the burning wood, the tall grass, the dirt roads, the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen in my entire life. I loved every moment of it. I even wrote this on my journal, was I feel like I'm in paradise. It was the best place. It was home. It was just so much fun.
For listeners, it would be jarring to hear that you're saying it's fun.
I totally understand, what you're saying. Somebody's going to listen to this and say, fun. Life isn't fun in a refugee camp. That's because you knew you were leaving. And that's very present in my mind. Of course, I knew that I had an end date. They can't get up and go and say, hey, today I'm going to go to the township that's next here, without having to go through getting permits and red tape and all of this stuff. You could be imprisoned if you were to leave the premises without the proper permits or whatnot. You can't just go and get a job. You can't just move, go to the next town. You can't do any of that. You depend on having your farmland or whatnot. Also depend on the institutions, and the people had really made a life there. But some of my friends really had a tough life. Some really tough stories. Some of these guys had everything, where they were from, right? They had so much wealth. And all of a sudden, they had to run away because their parents, their sisters, they were killed, they were raped, they suffered all this. And when I do say it was fun, I say it in the sense of they were thankful. They felt blessed, and that's something that I've always taken, is you have to be thankful and grateful for everything that you have, and not just material things, but your family, because you just never know.
Before she knew it, the workshop was over, and the women who, on the very first day of class, could barely let out a peep, had transformed before her eyes.
The last day, they had to present their business plans, and it was the most amazing day because they were all dressed up. One of the women's business was a salon. So she actually was like, I'll do everyone's hair for presentations. So she started her business right away. They all showed up with their best outfits, their hair all done, super nice, and they were presenting, and we invited other people to the presentation. So they were presenting in front of men, which was unthought of before, when we would have arrived. They were just super open and proud to be there and empowered throughout the whole presentation. And then at the end, we gave them their certificate, and they got their loan, and they were able to start their business. So that was a super cool experience. So to have seen them flourish, just being leaders in their sections of the refugee camp.
In the end, Nayeli may not have changed the world or even the camp, and perhaps that theory back in the college library didn't pan out exactly as she had planned. But she felt that there was something even greater at work here, something you can't find in a book.
The goal, when I first started, was very academic, very theoretical, very, like an academic project, like a school project. After I was there, I was like, no, like, if obviously, were we successful? I think we really were, because a few people had the opportunity to really, improve their lives. And hopefully they also learned from that, in the sense that, like, hey, somebody helped me, I'm going to help you. And that's just kind of the gift that keeps on giving. I remember we had like a big campfire and everybody came out and we were like dancing, and we also had like a guitar and a fire, and everyone was talking, everyone was dancing, and like I couldn't believe that I was going to be leaving. All of our friends came to say bye. I remember one of my friends, he made a bracelet with my name on it with beads, which I still have. And we were in the van, and I remember very clearly looking behind my friends, like in their bicycles, like cycling behind, That was tough because I knew I was leaving. So
just before she left, one of her friends let her know just how much their everyday conversations meant to him.
He was like, I'm going to study economics. You watch. And I'm like, yes, you will. Like, I'm sure that, whatever you set your mind to, you will get done. And sure enough, he moved to Sweden and he studied economics. and we all, he always sends me messages and says, like, I'll never forget our bicycle rides when we were talking about these things. But super cool to see once they left the settlement, and they're like, Nayeli, what you told me was right. And like, look, let me send you a picture of the first, snowstorm. You never really know when you're going to have like either an impact on someone or someone's going to have an impact on you.
It's been 10 years since Nayeli left the camp, and since then, her sense of injustice has become far more nuanced and real.
I understand that life is not fair. I get it. But now I'm more like, it's not fair, it doesn't mean I can't do anything about it. What can I do? My friend from the refugee camp was born in this place of the world, and this was his life. And I was born in this place of the world, and this was my life. And you have no choice. Like, that's just what happens. But you do have a choice to have an impact and do something about it. I've learned that there's your area of influence and your area of concern. And that's what you have to kind of manage and do what you can. Don't just say, like, oh, I can't do anything about it. Life's unfair, and that's what it is. Like, I don't think I could ever be like that, but I've just been more focused on what I can do directly, as opposed to just being so stressed out about all these other problems that I cannot change. I was changed in ways that I can never explain, ways that I don't even know, that have influenced, I'm sure, my way of life, the way that I do things, making sure that, don't ever judge people. You never know what's the story behind the person. And anything that you say might have such an impact on somebody. I don't know, putting your little bit to change the world is important, how little it might be. It doesn't have to be a big project, but anything you do will have an impact in one way or another.
EF Outbound is brought to you by EF Education First, the world leader in international education. This episode was hosted and produced by Shelby El-Atmani with help from me, Meg Martineau. It was sound designed by Billy Werasnik. For more information on the podcast, head over to ef.com/podcast. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to share your own transformative travel story, email us at outbound@ef.com.